In my previous video I was showing the Amiga 500 that I'd set up to take to the latest swag event, and during that swag event I was using this video backup system to try and recover an old backup from a videotape that I'd made some 25 years ago or so, I believe it was. So what I thought I'd do is go into more details on the video backup system itself and talk about what it is, what it does, what it consists of in terms of the hardware and the software, the VBS system that I own, because this is actually my original video backup system from all that time ago. And then I thought we'd go into doing some backups and some restores and going over the software, so actually go through a floppy disk backup, a floppy disk restore, and then do a complete system restore from this old 25-year-old backup that I've got, and go through the process of that and how that would have been done, say back in the day, using the original hard disk partitioning software and the boot disks for the video backup system, and then recovering all the files to the drive and then finally booting it up, as you would have to do back then. I'm not sure how much time all this is going to take, so this could be one part, this could be two parts, this video. I really don't know at this stage, but we'll just see how it goes. So what you can see here is a printout of what would have been the front cover of the video backup system box that you would receive, and this was in like a white, fairly flimsy plastic box, about the size of a VHS videotape. I don't seem to have my original box anymore. I do seem to recall that I threw it away because it got all broken up. Whether I can still find the original insert sleeve, I don't know, but it may show up. But this is actually the original manual, and the software is pretty well written. I found, other than a couple of issues which were down to me, I found the software so easy to use you don't really need the manual. I think the only thing you might need the manual for is an initial plugging in, because I got in a bit of a mess with that as to what cable needs to go where. But even without the manual you can figure it out. There's not that many possible combinations, and once you realise how it works, it's pretty straightforward. The only issues I had with the software was because I forgot that you could right click to get menus up on the top of the screen and workbench based programs, and because I've forgotten how to read on one of the screens, so I was doing the wrong thing. This is also my original VBS software disk. I don't know what version this actually is, because I also don't really recall when I purchased this. My Amiga ownership ended, I think, sometime in maybe late 1995, I think. I'm not 100% sure. The latest version of VBS was released in February 95 from what I can gather, and that was version 3.1. The original version looks to have been version 1.5, released in 93. Whether I owned this 93 or not, I don't know. I think more likely it was perhaps 1994, but who knows. And then you also have the VBS hardware itself. It's like a little dongle. This goes on the serial port. This isn't the original casing for this. I actually changed the casing, and I'll go into the details of that why in a little while. Now, as well as that, you would also get another lead, which was just like one of these. It would be a phono to a phono lead, and this unit would also have had two phono outputs, well, an input and an output on the end of the lead here as well. This actually splits off into two separate wires. The original software was written by Hugo Lyppens, and the hardware, I believe, was designed by Rob Langendoen. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, so apologies if either of those surnames are being pronounced wrong. Now, there's not a massive amount of information that I've been able to find online about these. Maybe other people have got other information that I haven't been able to find. Hugo does have a section on his website which does go into some of the details of the VBS, and there's also some links to some more technical articles on the actual software implementation and how it's able to do what it's able to do on what's a pretty low power machine really for what it's actually doing. Another website that's been a really helpful resource for me with this is the Big Book of Amiga Hardware, and I'll put links to all these places and people that I'm mentioning in the description. The Big Book of Amiga Hardware is very useful because there was an image that I needed to get this up and running, because I'd actually altered this back in the day for whatever reason. So the original VBS system hardware would have looked more like this. You would have still had a couple of wires coming out of this bit here. And this is just basically a DB25 socket or connector. And what they did was just use the housing as a case. And you can see here there's a section here where there should be some plastic tabs, which would have been where some metal clamps would clamp the cable to stop it pulling out, say if it was a printer or a floppy drive or something like that, although floppy drives are only 23 pin. And what they did is just chop that out of the way so they could squeeze a little tiny PCB in here, and then they ran a couple of wires out. Now I think this would be my only criticism of the video backup system, is the hardware, the way it was implemented. It was just a bit too flimsy and a bit too easy to damage. I didn't like that, which is why this has been recased into here. This is actually a Stereo Master sampler housing. Unfortunately, my Stereo Master sampler stopped working, so I just decided to put the case to better use rather than just shove it in the bin or in a box. So what we'll do here is we'll go a little bit Big Clive style with this one. And I've actually printed out what would have been in the original housing. Now I'd actually think that this plastic casing is the original VBS housing, or part of it. I don't know where the other half is that I had, but you can see it's certainly very similar to this one here. And you can see here how there's a little PCB just crammed in there, and they've chopped this plastic away, as you can see here, just to make room for that. But then there's no real strain support or anything on these wires out the back here, and with a bit of bending around they do eventually snap if you're not careful, so I wasn't too happy with that. So I rehomed it in this. And if I now open this up, just turn that over. Turn that back again, and you'll be able to see hopefully in there some similarity. So we've got the little PCB hiding down here, that big capacitor there. It's a very simple circuit. From what I've been reading, because there are other articles I've found, although I haven't been able to relocate all of them, this is basically just an op-amp chip, so the actual PCB doesn't really do anything particularly clever. It just seems to alter the signal levels from the composite signal into something that the serial port can accept. It doesn't do any kind of actual processing. That's all done in the software itself. So you'll see here I've just basically used like a post on the inside of this case over here just as a strain relief, and then I've ran additional cables, and this is just a bit of Vero board that I've soldered a DB25 connector onto just to have some physical anchoring to the plastic case, and that would fit on there, and then when the lid's on that's held firmly in place, if it was the right way around anyway. So that's just sort of held on there like that. There's not many connections on here. We've got 4 that side and that's it really. So we've got plus and minus 12 volts, a ground, and then there's also a data signal, because this actually only works to do the recovery from the tape. The actual backing up of the data is done through the composite mono composite output on the back of the Amiga 500, and then the video recorder is just literally recording a composite signal. The playback is different, that's routed through this, and as I say, it level shifts the signal is my understanding of how it works. Now when I first sort of got hold of this thing again out of the box that it had been stored in, I'd actually got this other thing connected to it, this additional wire with, as you can see, a couple of 9-volt battery connectors on here. And I seem to recall back in the day when I was using this used to get really hot. So for some reason I decided to wire in 2 9-volt batteries. The reason there's 2 is so that I could have +9 and -9 and a ground, which is why we've got these 3 wires here. So I was powering it from a battery and that kept it cooler. But all this had been disconnected, and I had a bit of a problem because you'll see there's an orange wire here, and that orange wire wasn't connected anywhere, and I hadn't got a clue where to connect it, even though I tried to have some foresight when I was in my late teens and put this little tiny wiring list in with the colours and the pins. Unfortunately, this orange wire doesn't seem to tally up with what this is, so luckily, having this diagram that I managed to find on the Big Book of Amiga Hardware helped me out immensely, because I could see where the wires were supposed to go on the chip. So without that, I would have been in a bit of a mess. It would have been a bit of guesswork, or having to trace things all the way through. But as you can see, this is a very, very crudely put together piece of hardware. I mean, I've obviously had the soldering iron on this as a teenager, and probably got a lot more solder and mess on it than it should have, but it still works, so might as well put my incorrect list back in here for historic reasons. So on my little quest to try and find out a bit more information about the system, I've managed to find the handful of surviving Amiga magazines that I still own, and I had a quick flip through, and it wasn't long before I found the ad for the video backup system, as you can see here. And there's quite a few things here that are quite interesting to know. So we've got use VCR as a backup storage device, obviously. Blank videotape is all that is required. Yep, you need a tape to record the data onto. 200 Amiga floppy disks will fit on a 4-hour tape, which is interesting because I couldn't remember the capacity of the tapes in terms of disks or data. Now I do somewhere have a list of all the floppy disks that I've backed up onto some of the tapes that I've got, because I still have about half a dozen tapes with floppy disk backups and other backups on them. And then it says here, can be used for hard disk backup. Now that's an interesting point, because this was actually the reason I bought this system. I wasn't trying to amass some enormous VHS based pirate copy of every game in existence. I actually genuinely just wanted to use it for what it was intended for. And for me that was to back up my old A590 20 meg hard drive without having to play disc jockey with 25 odd floppy disks just to make a backup, of which may not have been so reliable. And with this system, what was nice is you could set the backup going and just leave it, walk away and come back when it had done. Whereas with the floppy disks, obviously you had to stand there and babysit it to get the backup made. And I also wanted to make a couple of backups, so it was just a more viable option. And by the time you've spent money on 25, 40, 50 floppy disks, it soon starts to pay for itself. Back up an Amiga diskette in 1 minute. Yeah, it was very quick. I remember being surprised at how fast it would back up the floppy disks. It was just like you were copying disc to disc. Restore even to an unformatted disk. Well, that's not so much a feature, but more a side effect of how it works. When it does a floppy disk backup, I think it literally just copies sector by sector, so it doesn't matter whether it's DOS formatted or not. The only thing that would be an issue is if you've got copy protected disks, they would not copy properly, as they wouldn't with any other normal copying system. Hard disk backup software allows you to specify which files and directories to be stored. That was a very nice feature. You could go through, pick which files and folders you wanted to store, which ones you didn't, and then the backup would only back up those additional files. You could also do slightly more clever things, I think, with attributes, archiving attributes, so that you could run an incremental backup, I believe. We'll look into all of that as we go through the software. Low cost storage, 2 pence per megabyte. Yeah, I guess it was cheaper because the tapes are very cheap in terms of their capacity compared to, say, the equivalent capacity in floppy disks. But again, it wasn't so much the cost, I think, that drove me with this. It was more the backing up of the hard drive. Menu driven software, well, it was just a standard bit of GUI software. Allows you to watch TV on a 1084S monitor. I think this is a bit of marketing wankery here. This is definitely a stretch too far. What they basically mean by that is that the VBS system would allow a pass-through from the video recorder's composite out through to the 1084S's composite input, which you could have done anyway. You could always plug a video recorder into a 1084S monitor if you use the composite input. But this was actually quite useful because the 1084S monitor had a switch on the front that you could press that would toggle between showing the RGB input and the composite input. So you could switch between monitoring the Amiga's video output and what was going on the VHS video recorder, which was obviously very useful if you're trying to find a backup or find a disk, or just generally see what the backup system was doing. Very high reliability. Well, I've restored off some 25-year-old tapes and people have got loads of failing floppy disks, so can't argue with that one. Log files contain title and counter position of every backup. I'm not sure about the counter position thing, but I know it does generate log files of all the files or disk names if they're DOS based disks. Video connection check ensures foolproof operation. This basically means that when you try and do a backup, you have to have everything wired up properly, because it checks the output is coming back into the VBS dongle through the couple of cables on the back here, and if it's not connected up properly, it won't start the backup. Arguably there's also some software protection there as well, because theoretically you could just use the VBS software to make backups without having the hardware. Now obviously that wouldn't be much use if you wanted to restore a backup, but say you had a setup where you'd got a dozen Amigas, you could say, oh, I'll just buy one of these, and then if I need to restore, I'll plug it into that one Amiga, and then I can just use the software on all the other 11 Amigas for free. Well, that's a good way of preventing people from doing that. Although I'm not saying that is the reason it was done, but it would be a good way of protecting the investment in the software. Effective error correction scheme, I'm guessing so. I've had no problems restoring my backups. Easy to understand manual. The software is so easy to understand, you don't really need the manual. Highly rated. Wow, I guess so. And then you see here it was £59.95 here. From what I could gather, it was between £60 and £65 when it was out, and they also offered an upgrade to the version 3 from the older versions for £20. So if we just briefly look at this diagram in the manual here, you'll see how the setup works. So we've got our Amiga 500 here, and on the far left hand side at the back of the Amiga 500 is the composite output, which is a mono signal, which is fine because this only uses black and white images to create or to store the data. And you'll see that composite out will need to go to the VCR, and that goes to your composite input on the VCR, basically so the VCR can record whatever's coming out, the composite out on the A500. The VBS dongle, which is this beige gadget here in my case, that has the two wires coming out of it. That goes into your serial port, which is definitely not where they've located it on this diagram. And as you can see here, the video output from the video recorder goes into one of the leads, and they've got that marked as black here, because I believe the composite connections, or the composite plugs, one had got a black ring on it and one had got a red. So the black one goes to the VHS recorder, and then you've got the second one which goes to your composite on the 1084S monitor. So basically what that allows is anything being played on the VCR to pass through that and then be visible on the 1084S as well as this seeing it. I'm just going into shaky cam mode for a minute, and as you can see I've got the Amiga 500 Plus set up and the video recorder. I've not fully connected up the VBS yet, so I thought I'd just do that on camera. So you see we've got the VBS unit at the back here, that splits out to these two wires here. So the one that I said had got red on it, which I've actually changed for a red plug in this case, and then this is the black one. My video recorder's only got a SCART socket on the back of it, so what I've done is plug a SCART breakout cable in, and we've got the video in and out cables here. And what I'll do is connect the black cable for the VBS into the video out from the video recorder, so that will feed the composite video signal into the VBS unit. And then here we've got this pass through, and this is the one that would normally be connected to the 1084S's composite input, or you could connect it to another screen if you've got another screen. What I'm going to do here is connect it to this composite cable that I've already plugged into my monitor, because my monitor's got a composite input. I've also got this, quite fortunate with this screen, it's got this picture-in-picture, so I can set that to show a second input down there, which is a composite feed from here, as you'll see in a minute, and that's just the normal snow you get from a untuned channel on the video recorder. That then leaves us with this here, which is the video, or the composite input to the video recorder. So that will be connecting to the composite output on the back of the Amiga. That's the mono composite output, so that will give us a way to get the data, which is represented by various lines and things on the screen, which you'll see in a minute, and then that goes out to the video recorder so that can record it. And that is pretty much it for the cabling. It's very simple. Now I've got a tape here which does have some data on, and you'll see in a moment that should start playing, and that is actually the sort of screen you'll get when there's data on the tape recorded in the VBS system. There are other bits that appear on the screen as it goes through. There's a header at the start and like a title page which shows you what the name of the backup is that you created, or it'll show the name of the disk, and you'll probably see that in a second here. So in a moment you'll see here the next disk will have been inserted, and that disk has got the title as modules because it's a DOS formatted disk, and then you get the actual data stream, and that's literally being copied from the disk, and then that's encoded in some kind of visual display which you can see here. That's outputted via the mono composite output, and the video recorder just records that. So this is actually obviously a recording of a previously saved disk on VHS tape. So that's sort of the general setup of this system. What I'll do is start another video and make a part 2 where we'll actually go on to the software side of it and actually recover some data onto a floppy disk, do a backup, and then hopefully move on to this hard disk drive recovery as well. But I think that's enough for now, and I'll carry on with this in part 2.